Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I see some of you still enjoying your main course, so please continue with that. But it is now time to get into the next part of our event this afternoon, which I'm really looking forward to, a sit-down chat with our guest speaker, Ivan Vella from IGO. Before I introduce Ivan, if you'd like to submit a question or even just endorse someone else's question, that we will hopefully get time to address in our Q&A section at the end of our chat. Please go to the Slido app. It's slido.com if you want to enter it in the old-fashioned way, or if you want to just point your phone at the QR code on the screen, that will take you to the session that we are in this afternoon. If it asks you for a code, just as you see on the screen there, 24JUN, and that will take you in, and you can ask away, and hopefully we'll have time to get to as many of your questions as we can at the end of our chat. So to our guest this afternoon, Ivan Vella. Ivan was appointed as the Managing Director and CEO at IGO Limited in December of last year. Ivan's worked in the industry for 25 years, spending over 20 of those years with Rio Tinto, where he gained experience across various senior operating, commercial and functional roles. His experience covers iron ore, copper, coal, aluminium and now battery metals. His most recent role as the Chief Executive of Aluminium at Rio Tinto had global accountability for the world's largest Western aluminium production. Preceding this, he was Interim Chief Executive at Rio Tinto Iron Ore, Managing Director of their rail, ports and core infrastructure across WA. He also spent 5 years in Mongolia from 2010 building the Oyu Tolgoi Project and completing his term as the COO of that business. He is deeply passionate about the energy transition and has developed a broad understanding of relevant energy and materials markets. He's committed to growing IGO, leveraging the strong values and culture at the company while continuing to build partnerships with traditional owners, communities, governments and other industry partners. So would you please welcome to the stage from IGO, Ivan Vella. Thank you, Ivan. How are you?
I'm good, Tim.
It's
good.
Isn't it? Can everyone hear us around the room?
No, not on. Oh, yeah, now I'm on.
All right, very good. As I mentioned there, Ivan, December 23 was when you took over the reins at IGO, so you've reached the 6-month mark.
I have.
How have the 6 months been?
Well, it's been a busy time.
Yeah.
Plenty to do, plenty to learn, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But look, before I get in too far, I also just wanted to thank everyone for being here. It is a great privilege to be on this stage and to recognise all of the leaders, I guess, across the industry that have been here before. And congratulations, Danny, on your new appointment. Well done. And thank you to the West Australian Mining Club for bringing us together regularly. For me, this is so important to bring the industry together, to reconnect, to network and to keep building our industry to be stronger and stronger.
Yep.
I also want to acknowledge the Whadjuk people of Noongar Nation as well and just pay my respects. And we'll talk, I'm sure, about it. I've lived all over the world, and for me, that simple acknowledgement and the connection and recognition that there's 4,000 generations that goes before us, and look how beautiful it is. Yeah. This is where I call home and where we call home. I think that's a wonderful point of respect.
Yeah, so. We're very lucky. Yeah.
And so, yeah, to the 6 months, plenty on. I think it was week 3 that I was sitting, and some of the leadership team from IGO was sitting down the front here. We were making the decision around Cosmos, or the project coming out of Western Areas, to put into care and maintenance. And you can only imagine how hard that is, you know, one of the first big decisions to take. At the end of the day, I guess I had the fresh eyes and the ability to sort of look forward and say, we need to stop and reset and rethink it. But there was still a lot of people whose, I guess, heart was sitting very high in their throat, waiting to understand what would be next.
Given that challenge that you had, coupled with, I suppose, the really unusual and tragic circumstances around the sudden passing of the very much admired industry heavyweight in Peter Bradford at IGO. It really quite unusual circumstances for you to come into a role like this. What was it that drew you to, leaving this behemoth like Rio and taking on a role at IGO, given those things that were happening around you?
Yeah, look, first, it's a great chance to call out and recognise Peter and his amazing legacy. It's almost exactly 2 years ago he was on this stage talking to you and reflecting on the energy transition, reflecting on, I think you probably all remember the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere, how that had grown when I was born from 320 parts per million to 420 and so on. It was a huge shock. I don't think any business can ever prepare to have their leader, their chief executive, die in office. And all I walked into was a sense of Peter was and is revered. He was an incredibly engaging leader. He built deep connections with the entire workforce, contractors, the industry. I'm sure many of you know him and can reflect positively about that. And he had this enormous vision for the business. And that brings me to the first thing that pulled me to IGO, which was purpose. I'm very much purpose-driven and care deeply about the impact that the mining industry makes. It's essential. It's something that we have to have, even more so with the energy transition. But we are regarded poorly by most of our stakeholders for not managing our impacts adequately. Peter was someone who said, I'm taking that on. Not only am I going to make a difference around the energy transition and battery materials, but I'm also going to do this ethically, responsibly, safely, very thoughtfully, and he really wanted to show leadership there. So all of those ingredients drew me.
Yep.
They really resonated. And of course, the industry itself, the battery materials, broader energy transition, and if I could call out lithium, and they've got some slides in a minute we'll put up just to start getting you to sort of reflect and laugh a bit, but this is an amazing sector. Mining's interesting, but lithium is wild. This is a brand new commodity and there's nothing like it. So those things really got me excited to be able to sort of connect with the values and purpose of the company, the way they do business, but then equally be in a space that's open to lots of influence and lots of leadership.
I suppose I reeled off some of the commodity sectors that you had some experience in. Lithium wasn't on that list.
No.
Was it something that you've wanted to do for some time, work in that space?
Yeah, I make the most of wherever I am, and I've had such an interesting career with Rio. I've learned so much in that time. The last was based in Montreal, running the aluminium business, which is very heavy processing, and a big part of it's about energy. And I'd had this sort of connection with energy, the energy transition, but you live it and breathe it in aluminium. And in Canada, they are very, very well endowed with a lot of green energy. So we leveraged that in that part of the business. But equally, you got to see the challenge in the North American region, in Europe, and how that was playing out. And so for me to see the other sector around battery materials, which I felt was a very high growth, very high opportunity sector. Aluminium's a tough business for anyone who's worked in it. I don't know if there's some colleagues here from Alcoa or South 32.
Got two hands in the air down the corner.
I'm sure they're relating to that. It's difficult, but it's also essential. But the swing back into lithium, given it's nascent, it's brand new, and it's growing at 15-20% per annum.
Yeah. So 6 months in, no regrets.
No regrets. No.
Well, let's talk about lithium then, because there's plenty to get through. And I know this afternoon you're pretty keen to address some of the myths and misconceptions around lithium. And I know you're very passionate about EVs, which of course is driving the lithium market. If you were to go and buy a new car tomorrow, would you even entertain an internal combustion engine, or would you just go straight for an EV?
So I feel like this is a setup, going back to Peter. First of all, first disclosure, I don't own a car currently. That probably surprises you. So I got back to Perth in end of last year, and my wife has a Land Cruiser. So there's some work to do there, but that's that's her passion. And so I'm like, what am I going to do? And my kids said outright, no Teslas. They just didn't like the Tesla. I've got a 12-year-old daughter, Ali, 14-year-old son, Liam, hardline.
Really? No
now,
Tesla?
Peter had his Tesla. I'm sure many of you, he used to talk very proudly about his Tesla, and he came from the big muscle car vintage, right? That was Peter's heritage. So he made this transition. So everyone's looking at me going, well, you better get an EV. You're in the battery business. What's going on? And I was like, well, I don't know. My kids are saying no Tesla. I just need to learn a bit more about this industry and about these EVs first.
Yep.
And it turns out that fits well with my job as well. So I've held out, and I've been Ubering since. So it's 6 months now, and if I'm an advocate for not owning a car in a place like Perth, it works a treat.
Yeah.
I had one moment on the weekend where it didn't. My wife called me on Saturday night. I'm sitting there doing some notes. We've had a board meeting this week. I'm reading and preparing. She rings me about 9 o'clock. She's picking up my daughter from a party and says, we've got a problem. I said, right. She said, I've got 2 flat tyres. I went, how does that happen? I've raced off-road cars and not got 2 flat tyres. She goes, I don't know, they just both went flat. I went, I can't help you, better call a tow truck then. I said, I can come and fix 1 tyre, but I can't fix 2. Anyway, so RAC came out, picked her up, towed her, drove them home, took it off, put it in the garage. Sunday morning I got out and had a look, and a star picket in the curb had gone through 2 tyres.
Oh.
That was the moment I wish I had a car.
Yeah. Well, if that's one moment in six or 7 months, you're doing okay.
But so look, I would buy an EV.
Yeah.
And what I've learned, and let me actually put up the first slide. The headlines are hilarious, right? And look, I'm sure there's lots of questions in the room. I'd love to hear what's on your mind or what you hear around EVs. The media could not be more negative. They could not be more pessimistic. There's this real doubt:
fair.
are we going to move EV or not? The next one I love. Couple of little cartoons here. The OEMs in North America, they're making real progress. That's not what you would expect if you read the headlines. In China, they're well over 35% penetration across the whole market. And more importantly, when you go and look under the covers, in the last 6 months or 5 months, I've had 3 trips to China to go and learn about this industry and go and look at these manufacturers. They're amazing. You go and look at how they're producing. BYD is obviously one of the big names. NIO is another one. These are very, very well-built cars. They're very simple, so they're low cost to build. Yes, there's a lot of capital to set up to do it. Highly automated factories. So NIO, you pick out your phone or your iPad, you type in your order. That order goes into the system. 2 weeks later, that will come onto the production line, and it's custom made, whatever your colour, upholstery and paint, whatever detail you like, and out it pops.
So 2 weeks from ordering to delivery.
Yeah, extraordinary.
That's phenomenal.
Phenomenal, and it's automated. These factories, they didn't let us take phones in. You literally had to put stickers over your phone and hand them in. Fully automated. There's almost no people. People talk about China and they say, oh yeah, it's cheap labour, dirty. I'm quoting Doug Ford from Ontario, the Premier there in Canada. It's dirty power and cheap labour. Well, it's actually a lot of capital, a lot of R&D, a lot of sophisticated manufacturing, a really good product, made very cheaply, and intense competition. So one of the manufacturers we went and saw, they're losing $3 billion a year. So don't know how long they'll do that, but the point is they're all in, trying to win, trying to gain market share and position in China. And out of that comes a better product, a cheaper product, more development, deep thinking into battery chemistries and so on. But you look at the actual underlying asset, the car, 2 aluminium chassis rails, the battery in the middle. I've got some photos I'll throw up in a minute. The wheel motor, 1 or 2, depending on how fast you want to go. Some suspension and brakes, and then they just put a nice cab on top, either aluminium or steel, depending on the price point. It's got a big TV screen in the middle of it, and they're all wired with the sensors and cameras to go fully automated. So they're future-proofing them to a degree. You can ultimately look at your car and say 10 years from now, it's still going to be relevant, still going to be functional. It will adapt with times. And in Wuhan and a couple of other cities, they've got taxis there in a trial mode. Half of the taxis are autonomous. So they're trialling the technology. So we hear about Tesla and all the developments there, and they've done some fantastic work, but China's doing it. So I see all of that and I go, am I comfortable to buy a Chinese EV? Yeah, they're really impressive. The barrier, of course, the one, and particularly in a place like Australia, is charging stations. It's the infrastructure. That's what creates range anxiety. That's what creates the hold-up. That's just a matter of time. China's got I think it's 3 million-ish already rolled out across the public charging stations. The US is starting to really get a move on now. Europe's moving. That'll come, but it's a bit like when we moved from, and it wasn't when I was born, but you could read about it, from black and white TVs to colour TVs. You go back in time, and there's probably a few people who might remember, and there was doubt. Well, will this work, this colour TV? I mean, we're going to get there. We will be all driving EVs in the near future because they're just simply a better, cheaper product.
Yeah, which is an argument that you constantly hear, isn't it, about whether they are going to just completely wipe out old school internal combustion. I mean, on this very stage at this event, we've had people up here arguing that it's not going to happen. Arguing even just on the carbon footprint argument alone, it doesn't stack up yet. The carbon cost of just producing one of these vehicles doesn't offset the benefit you might get from running an electric motor.
Yeah.
Where do you stand on that?
So I'm sure everyone appreciates, there's no one answer on the carbon impact of a EV versus an ICE, depending on where you source your power and how it's built and so on, but it's somewhere between 1.5 years and worst case 6 years. The average is coming in around 2 to 3 years. There's people measuring this really closely. Yes, there is a lag there, but that's only getting better as well. Obviously, as there's more and more green energy used to produce the batteries, which is a very intensive process, then that quantum comes down. At the end of the day, I think while there's clearly a climate benefit or a broader benefit for the world in this transition, the move to EVs, I don't think, at the moment it's motivated largely by government policy. That's what's driving China. If you want to buy a new car, you need a number plate for it. And if you get a green number plate, it doesn't cost you much. If you get a yellow or a blue one, which means an ICE, it costs you a lot of money. They're very simple incentive, very clear, it's very obvious. And if you drive around Shanghai, all you see is green number plates. If you drive around Shenzhen, that's it, even the trucks and buses. The US and Canada are getting there with their incentives as well. So that take-up's coming at the moment largely because of government pressure.
Yep.
There are, I guess, a segment of the world that believes strongly in trying to make their contribution towards climate, and they're buying even a higher priced, higher cost vehicle to do that. And I think the early take-up for Tesla was a mark of that. But I think we're going to see mass market move simply because it's a better, cheaper product. That's coming very soon. And the big benefit that follow will be 10% of our global emissions for vehicles will be addressed in time. And if, look, the tariffs in the US slow it down, well, the rest of the world, there's a lot of population too, right? There's 400 million in North America, but we've got plenty of other billions of people that want cars in many other sectors that I think can stand back and think, how do we want to get there?
Let's address the infrastructure issue then. I mean, range anxiety is a pretty well-used phrase nowadays, isn't it? Particularly when you're having the EV debate here in Australia. It's a very different argument, I imagine, having that in China. Just the population and density is just nothing like what we have here in Australia. So, I mean, where are we in terms of addressing range anxiety here in Australia? I mean, are we as far along the process as you think we ought to be?
There's two levers here. One is battery design or battery chemistry, and you've probably heard some of the acronyms, LFP. So this is look, the things that they trade off. So if you go and talk with BYD's research department, they think about safety. So we all understand lithium batteries have a propensity for a thermal runaway or a fire if it's punctured the wrong way. LFP doesn't have that problem, and they showed us. They literally punctured an NCM, a nickel-based battery, and a iron phosphate-based battery, and it had no effect. And this one, nice big barbecue flame. So, they're thinking deeply about that. The second is, of course, cost, and the third driver is performance. And of course, LFP as an option has less energy density and therefore doesn't quite have the same range. In China, people just don't care. They want cheap, reliable, safe, and so they're going there en masse. Tesla's got a fair chunk of LFP. They do some of the nickel-based batteries as well. And there's another form that's somewhere in the middle, which basically brings, I guess, a bit of both technologies together. And the latest thinking now is starting that the electrolyte is the problem in the whole battery chemistry that they're trying to manage. They're working towards let's call it a semi-solid state, or reducing the amount of electrolyte that causes that safety risk. So they're working through those issues. Ultimately, the density or the performance of the battery is what gives you the range in the vehicle. There are other things that affect that, like climate. So in Canada, when it's really cold, they suffer a bit. Here, we're lucky, we won't have that issue. But when we hear about, I need 700 kilometre range, well, how many of you have driven 600 kilometres anywhere in a day? I mean, it's very rare. If I go to Greenbushes, maybe Matt and I'll go down and we'll do a day there and back on a tank of fuel, but that's unusual. It's more just if I need to recharge and I'm not in a good place or there isn't a charging station, I've got an issue. So China's dealt with that, and actually I'll go back and show you a great little video. NIO is one of the more progressive manufacturers, and this is what they've done. Oh, hang on. So that's, think about it like a drive-through car wash, and they've got, I think nearly 3,500 of these around the major parts of China now. And so this is what happens. You've, and this one's got a back on it, but basically you drive up, you either drive in yourself or your car can do it for you, and the battery in it gets changed out in about 90 seconds. So there's a little robot that comes up under the floor, you'll see it now, unscrews the floor pan, takes the battery out, puts a freshly charged battery in. Your battery goes back into stock, it gets some analytics done on it. If it's healthy, they recharge it for the next customer, and if it's not, they'll swap it out and put another one in there. Think of it like swap and go for your gas cylinder when you go to Bunnings, right? It's that simple, and it's the same as going to a fuel station, only quicker. So that's one pathway. BYD's just going to try and improve their battery density. There's a bunch of different answers to the problem. You do need the infrastructure. So, China builds these very cheaply. And I was talking to Matt Halliday, he's the CEO at Ampol, a couple of weeks ago, and he's thinking, where does Ampol go? They're all their fuel stations. What do they do? And those are the kind of questions that are going to come for us. But at the end of the day, that's where we're going to end up. Yeah. Some variant, of charging stations, of battery change-outs, and so on. The other takeaway I got from the conversations we had there with these manufacturers is if there's some big evolution in battery chemistry, we shouldn't be stressed about it. That was another narrative or myth that the media was perpetuating. Oh, well, you could be stuck with old batteries and your car won't be useless after 6 years because, we've all been used to having one of our mobile phones when the battery starts to die. Well, I asked BYD, I said, what happens? They said, comes in for a service in less than 1 day, we just change your battery. And so the mythologies that we're living with in the media are just disconnected with where some of the development and the technology and the thinking's going. They're dealing with these issues. And I think our ability to see through that and partner, we'll come back to the supply side in a minute. For us as a mining industry, we need to play into that. The last, piece I'd talk about on range anxiety or battery performance is the debate about lithium versus alternatives. And of course, sodium popped up as a big alternative in the media for a while. We talked to them, we said, where did that come from? They said, well, when you're paying $80,000 per tonne for lithium hydroxide, people get motivated to find alternatives. I'm pretty sure if copper gets to $15,000 a tonne, aluminium will get more popular. But at the end of the day, sodium is fundamentally less advantageous than lithium to make a battery. The way, as a chemical element, you ultimately are starting with something that can produce less voltage and produce less energy density. Lithium can be safe, as they've demonstrated. So they said their view is it's more about how the market balance plays out and more about where the cost curve sits. That's what's going to drive a push towards sodium as opposed to lithium. Their view, and that was across the board, is that lithium is here to stay. The development, the technology and the investment into that through the value chains is very significant. Sure, we'll see sodium as well, and it will be an and, but when you look at the growth in demand of gigawatt hours that have to be produced in batteries around the world, it's enormous.
Yeah. Just going back to that NIO example there, so how does it work then? You buy the car.
So
Do
you pay 15.
You own the obviously you own the battery
car.
that comes with the car, and then
You pay a
what happens after
$1,500 subscription per annum,
yeah.
and you cost, I think it's about $10 per battery change.
Okay.
It's not
So
bad.
the anti-EV argument here is often presented around batteries, and you know the value of the car basically being wiped out when the battery gets to the end of its life.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
does that counter that argument then?
I think so.
Yeah.
That's what I'm seeing. And
How does it work though if you're driving a Neo around and you know after 5-10 years or whatever you just constantly sticking a new battery in?
well,
every
every time you go and get a new fresh charged battery, it's probably
Yeah.
a different battery to the one you had before.
So do the cars there hold the value in the same way that an old internal combustion
Yeah,
car
I mean,
would,
good
or-
question. That
Yeah.
that I can't comment on at this point.
Yeah.
I think it's a bit early to say how that trends, but I guess it's a bit like the example I gave you of a colour TV. I mean, when you first bought them, it was $20,000 a
Yeah.
TV or something. You remember the first plasma, and now it's it's $800 from JB Hi-Fi.
Yeah.
Look, all those things will change. I'm looking at this industry from the bottom-up cost point of view and saying, what does it cost to make this? How reliable is it? How functional is it? And one of the things I've asked the team to really study so we understand it better is total cost of ownership. So what's the upfront capital? What we've learned is that the capital intensity to build these car plants and the feed of battery for it is very significant, more than an ICE. And so for OEMs going into this space, it's hard. They've got to be all in. It's a big commitment. But once they've got that plant, it's much cheaper to make these vehicles. It's cheaper because they're simpler. They're fundamentally a simpler asset. This is where I think the hybrids, plug-in hybrids, are going to come into question. They're a nice middle ground for us in Australia, where we've got long geographies and probably the infrastructure lag. But the problem is you've effectively got two systems working in parallel. You've still got the combustion engine and all of the requirements for that, and then you've got your battery as well. So at some point, that's just, from a cost point of view, not going to be as competitive as a straight plug-in, a straight EV.
You mentioned you had a conversation with your friend at Ampol the other week. Is it going to be the market that drives the push towards better infrastructure here, or is it going to be primarily led by government? Where do you think it's going to
So far, what we're seeing in the world is that governments are leading this. Certainly China, Canada, the US, Europe, and Europe's quite progressive as well. At some point, though, I think as consumers, and that's one of the big drivers for the energy transition. In fact, I think one of the frictions for the energy transition is consumer adoption or consumer acceptance of that shift. So when it's a better product, it's cheaper, and there's that pull, I think we'll see a very fast ramp up.
Yeah. Let's talk about the market more generally. Been a fairly rocky road, hasn't it?
It's bumpy in the
lithium
last month,
market.
hasn't it?
Yeah, and of course going back a little bit beyond that as well, it's come back from some pretty extraordinary highs from what, a year and a bit ago. How do you see it moving in the months and maybe let's not look too far into the future, but let's start with the months ahead. Is it priced now where it should have been? Is it just corrected back to where it should be, or is it undervalued?
Well, right now, and I'm sure there's people in the room who follow this more closely than I do and are right on top of it, but I mean, what we've seen in the last month is an awful lot of negative sentiment around the equities around lithium, but there hasn't really been any movement on the actual cost or price of the material, which is unusual. And this is still because it's such a small industry and it's very nascent and immature, and there isn't a lot of transparency or openness to see through supply chains, inventory, and so on. It doesn't have the maturity of iron ore or copper or aluminium, where you've got these global markets that have indexes and a real view on inventory. So the quick answer is I don't know. I don't think anyone does, because no one would have picked this right now. I read all the analyst reports, and it just feels like gossip. You read so-and-so went so-and-so and heard that this particular lithium conversion factory shut down. It's like, yeah, they're doing maintenance. That doesn't mean there's a supply disruption, up or down. I think we're all so starved of real facts that we're reacting to a lot of small little granules of data. I was in China 3 weeks ago, and I didn't hear full supply chains. And in fact, the latest EV numbers came out of China. They're still increasing, still more demand. So I think there's just a lot of uncertainty, and that creates this anxiety, and then sentiment can drive, of course, equities. While that's important, I think you have to be able to see through that. And I'm sure for everyone in the business here in commodities and in mining, we know that if you follow today's commodity price, you're probably going to make bad decisions. You've got to look through that. And so then it's more about, and we spend a lot of time trying to understand that cost curve and how will it evolve. What is it really today? What will it be in 2030? What will it be in 2035? And what's influencing that?
You mentioned that you've been travelling to China a lot. We also had the Chinese Premier here recently. How significant is it that when he came to WA, he spent a big chunk of his limited time here going down to an asset that you have obviously a big stake in? I mean, in his time in Australia, he went to South Australia, all he really talked about was maybe bringing a couple of pandas. When he came to WA, his focus was lithium. So how significant is that?
Yeah, what a privilege, right?
Yeah.
And Raza's sitting in front of me, put that event together, that visit, and all credit to the team at Tianqi. Amazing. I mean, I think we probably all underestimate the magnitude of that visit. You know, the Premier from China is enormously powerful role, huge presence and influence, and you know, for him to sort of come and pay attention, and he was deeply interested. Like he asking questions and really curious. Ran over time, probably got all of his minders in trouble. But that's a great treat for WA and for the presence that we have here in this industry, the relevance that WA has for lithium and battery materials. So I'm sure there were other people in the audience who probably had invites out for him to go other places. Yeah. But he chose that refinery.
Did you get to have a chat to him?
I didn't.
Yourself?
No, he had plenty to do, plenty to listen to.
Quite an entourage with him.
Correct. Yes, there was a reasonable cordon around him.
Yeah, and a security detail.
I stood next to this security guy that made me look like I was a minion.
I think you had a photo of you know, on a recent trip to China there. You were standing next to some pretty flash-looking sports car style EVs. Did you show them to your kids? I know they said no Tesla, but
I was showing that these two. So
surely that gets you over the line.
The green car there, and this is the point around the technology. That's a McLaren killer. So the NEO team were very proud to tell us this story. It's got four-wheel motors. It does, I think, 500-600 kilometre range. 0 to 200 in 7 seconds.
To 200?
To 200 in 7 seconds. So most normal cars do 0 to 100 in 7 seconds. But most importantly, for anyone who's into motorsport knows about the Nürburgring in Germany. It's somewhere I've personally driven that ring, and it's super exciting. Yeah. I did it in a Golf GTI the first time. I did it in a Porsche the next time, and it's a lot of fun. And I had a driving instructor, let's call him, to coach me through the event. So that car, and so let me put it in context. In an average car, doing a sensible but going hard run, you're probably 12, 14 minutes. A world-class race driver in a GTR or Porsche or something like that's in the sort of 7.5 to 8 minutes. That car does it in 6 minutes 45. Yeah, right. It's just insane performance. Yeah. Now, the real takeaway is that car beats a $2 million McLaren. And guess what it cost them to build? 150 grand. Wow.
What do they sell them for?
They didn't tell me that. I mean, another anecdote we heard while we were there, that, there was this deep concern because BMW has their X4, their sort of 4 Series EV, and they have to heavily discount it in China to sell it. And of course that causes all these frictions back in Europe. But this is what's going on, right? It's real competition, pushing the cost down, giving consumers a better product at a cheaper price. Yeah. And I think that's, and it helps the climate. It starts moving the energy transition and fundamentally builds these value chains to do a lot more. That's an industry that I'm really eager about supporting.
So how does WA maximise its position now on the global stage as a lithium player? Yeah,
well, look, I think I was talking about the cost curve, and what we're seeing is, I think, a greater awareness that lithium is very ubiquitous. There's lots of it around the world in very, very low concentrations. There are a few assets, and Greenbushes is one of them. One of the other reasons I came to IGO, because it has an interest in that. It's an amazing asset. It's extremely unique. And if you look at the world of hard rock lithium assets, there's nothing like it. Do I think that someone will find something similar? Probably. but it's hard, right? It's very unique. But if we look at then sort of where WA is, and we've got great presence, and I don't know if Tony or anyone from Liontown's here, but they're about to start up, I imagine, any day now. Great job, right? What a fantastic project, what a fantastic story about how they've gone about building a mine up front, thinking about the impacts, thinking about their energy usage, the design and the development of that business. We're good at that in WA. We're good at discovering, developing and building mines. And of course, I think we can challenge ourselves on a few things I'll come back to, but we've got a good presence in lithium, and yes, it's ubiquitous, and if we get on our bike and we chase it hard, we can be big in lithium. We can be bigger, we can be far more influential, and then we can probably start to have some impact on that market and drive into China in a way that has real influence. If we continue to sort of just do our bits on our own, I think that's difficult. And who are we competing with? We are competing with brines in South America, particularly Argentina. Very, very high quality brines. And we looked at the DLE technology wire in China. It's really good. So anyone who says it doesn't work, that's not true. It does work. It works very well, and it's very low cost. But it's not overnight either. You know, I think some people seem to think that lithium's like the Pantene ad. 2 weeks and you'll know the difference with your hair. This takes time. In Chile, it's 58 months to permit a new project. 58 months. No one talks about that. They just, there's a wall of supply coming. In Argentina, there are some challenges. They're producing at pretty high altitudes. It's difficult to get the material there. The labour and the workforce doesn't have the capability that we do. So they will build lots of supply. It will come on and it will be very low cost. It will be the floor of the cost curve, I'm sure. But is there space in a very rapidly growing market that needs to triple roughly in the next decade for us to bring our mines online in WA and make a difference? Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's where I think we've got to get down to what have we got to change, or where do we need to be focusing our energy as a mining industry to be successful there and garner our share of this market, because there's already more lithium resources identified around the world than we need for a fair way to come. The question is, which of those is coming out of the ground to make value and make jobs for WA?
Yeah. Time's getting away from us, so I'm going to throw a few questions from the audience your way now, Ivan. So here we go. And please keep them coming in. I'll try to get through as many as we can before Cass gives me the wind up. I feel like it's coming, but we might get a few in, Cass. Firstly, your thoughts on the West Arunta region and the future of niobium?
Well, yeah.
It's
a couple of businesses have done very well. Encounter, well done. I don't know if there's anyone here. Congratulations. Look, it speaks to WA. We are a very prospective region. We've got great exploration capabilities. It's another piece of IGO that I'm super proud of, and we've got some of the team over here who are back out to the field next week, in fact. We need more lithium, we need more nickel, we need more copper, we need more rare earths, and there's certainly looks like there's some great opportunity. Yep. WA1, same thing, looks like a world-class deposit.
Your thoughts also on moving into battery materials outside of your nickel, copper and lithium strategy, rare earths, for example? Yeah,
look, I mean, our exploration team obviously keep an open mind. They're focused on what they're chasing, but they'll certainly flag it if they identify something else. But those three value pools give us real focus. Lithium, nickel and copper. Clearly copper's a massive value pool. But lithium's very much a focus, and I think the time is now for lithium. I think if people have real interest, we need to get moving on it. Rare earths is a difficult business, and there aren't too many people who can say that they have got deep expertise. China processes, I think it's approaching 80% of the rare earth products in the world. So if you're getting into that space, I'd suggest you really want to have deep capability, and that's not high on my focus list.
Okay, all right, that was pretty clear. Another question about the impact of the Financial Market Infrastructure and Other Measures Bill of 2024, the impact of that to your business with ESG becoming mandatory.
Wow, that's a complicated.
That's a chunky. That's anonymous too, so you can't sort of identify who's asked that and
Someone
hunt them down afterwards.
ESG becoming mandatory.
Yeah. Look, I don't know if anyone wants to clarify that.
I'm not sure I fully understand. Look, my view on an ESG, it's a phrase that's really come up and into focus in the last 3-4 years. For me, and language I use is the speed of trust. And I think about the trust with stakeholders, whether that's the Indigenous traditional owners of the country we might be mining on, local communities, suppliers, our employees and contractors, all of the stakeholders, our shareholders, everyone around us. We only move as fast as the speed of trust. If you think about the pace of permitting or development of a project, it is about all of those stakeholders getting comfortable with us. And of course, mining has a pretty ordinary track record, so there's generally a fair few hurdles to get through. So for me, ESG should be driven internally. It should be about what we believe in. It should be about the standards and the performance that we want to show to our stakeholders, and we should show leadership up front. I don't think we should be trying to just keep up with the line of regulation or expectation. And I think that's where IGO is. IGO stands out as someone as a company that's focused on doing things the right way, and that's core to our DNA.
All right, final question. What's the future of Nova?
What's the future of Nova? Well, Nova's a world-class nickel deposit, for those who don't know. It's coming to the end of its life. It's got maybe just over 2 years to go, and the team's doing a great job. As any mine gets closer to its end of life, it gets more difficult. So they'll manage that well. I think the challenge is for the nickel industry in WA, we need more Novas. Now, IGO has been searching hard for another one in the region and has not been successful. Doesn't mean to say they're not there, but look, our job is to basically finish that mine professionally, do a really good job, and think about our people and the impact for them. One of the biggest issues I feel is, and it's coming up even sooner with Forrestania, is when a mine comes to its end of life, which happens, how we go about that closure process and wind down, and how we think about the assets and get the best value from them. All of those decisions say something about who we are as a company, as an industry. So we'll be taking that through into our Nova in a few years' time.
Certainly others have gone out hunting in that same region too, haven't they?
They have plenty.
Blown their money out there. Are you surprised that other clusters haven't been found?
Look, I'm not an expert in geology. I understand that we should expect there is more in the area, but it's very deep and it's very hard to find. And so this is the dilemma. And of course, the nickel industry has transformed in the last few years. We know all the story around what's happened up in Indonesia. It's another example where I think what you read in the media is not entirely connected with reality. But there's a couple of companies that have developed technology, invested heavily, and have built incredible capacity. And so they've just set the market. And I think if you want to compete, then you compete on that basis. I'm not a big believer in bifurcated pricing and premiums. I think everyone should be mining and developing with ESG in mind, and ultimately trying to drive the cost down.
All right. We're out of time. Thank you for the questions that were submitted from the audience. Thank you, Ivan. Stay where you are. I'll invite Danny up to offer a more official vote of thanks.
Yeah, fabulous. Thanks, Ivan, so much. Obviously, it has been a big 6 months, as you mentioned. I love the fact that IGO and yourself continue Peter Bradford's vision and his values towards the energy transition, and that resonates with you coming into this position. That lithium is a wild ride, and there's nothing quite like it. We'll all be buying EVs in the future because they're a better, cheaper product. I really enjoyed the swap and go batteries. When are we getting that to Western Australia? And that the time is now for lithium. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Danny.
Would you please thank Ivan Vella? Thanks, man.